All right, let's turn next to the World Inequality database dataset, which is probably the most challenging to clean up among all that we go over here. And so the first thing you see is that we have downloaded it as a table rather than a list. So for every country, we have a separate column rather than a stacked time series. So we have to convert this into a stacked time series. So as always, the first thing that we do is let's just copy and paste the data set into a new sheet. And let's just paste special values. Okay. So now we see that we have for each column name, or for each country, we have at the very end the country name. So we have here Switzerland, then here we have Eastern Europe, but there's all this other stuff in front of it which we don't really need. So the first thing we need to do is we need to get rid of this and make sure that we can identify the countries. So what we need is we need the last element here, basically the country name after split. Okay, so this will be the first challenge. And another thing that you often want to do is a lot of those observations have just a blank cell. They are essentially missing observations. So before we clean up the first row with the country names, let's just make sure that we replace all the empty cells. So we Control F, and then we just replace, if there is nothing, we replace by 2 dots. And then we replace all. Okay. So now we have all those empty cells replaced by 2 dots. Okay, I also forgot to call maybe sheet 1 again, Marcus, just to make sure that I know this is the worksheet on which I played around. Okay, so the first challenge will be, how can I get rid of everything else here other than the country name in the last cell? So what I do first is I'll just copy again the first row in a separate sheet, and I call that sheet country names. Country names, and I'll just paste them transpose. So again, transpose takes a horizontal or a row and turns it into a column. Okay, so if we take a look into the first cell now, for example, what we can see is that the cells are essentially in rows. And what we need is we always need the last row. So we can see that if we highlight everything and we fit to content now by double clicking on the rows. Okay, now if we just stretch it up a little bit. Okay, so if we go to format cells and we go to align and we do wrap text, then we see that here we have a cell that contains several rows. Okay, so now we can see that. And now we see that first row is Switzerland, then Eastern Europe, Uruguay, Syrian Arab Republic. So we need to get rid of everything else. So one challenge is, how can we identify the 1, 2, 3, 4th, or the last row of it's basically the last line in a filled cell. So sometimes, you stumble over a problem in Excel, and most of the times you are not the first one to have a certain problem, and there's always a great chance that someone has already solved your problem. So let's quickly solve, or let's try to use the internet to solve this problem by searching. So I quickly open Google, and just gotta pause here quickly. So here I opened Google, and I search for how to find the last line in an Excel cell. And let's see what we get. So let's go to the end. So now we have to see. So Excel formula, get last line in cell, Excel chat. Well, that sounds promising. So let's click into this one. Okay, so there seems to be a good example. And here they already have a generic formula. So what I'll do is I'll just copy that formula. I don't really know what it does, but I'll just copy it and use it in my Excel sheet. So I go back to my Excel. And I'll insert it here, and can't really see anything. That's probably because the color might be white. So let's change the font color to automatic, or let's press enter. Okay, I don't know why I can't see it. So let's just copy the format from the first column and just paste it here and see why I can't see anything. And the problem is that the formula is there and it just didn't do anything. So the formula probably works, but there's nothing to display yet. So we have to see. So trim right. Well, we definitely don't want to link it to B5. I probably want to extract, not probably, I want to extract something from cell A1. So let's try what happens if I enter here A1. Oh, okay, so now we have Switzerland. So that formula works. Don't ask me specifically what that formula does. All I know is that it works. So now let's go to the second cell and just copy down and see if that works as well. Okay, so now we got Eastern Europe, Uruguay. So it seems that this cell or this formula works. So I can just safely copy it down, and that really looks like as if it has worked very nicely. So now what I do next is I copy all those country names, but before I do that, I take out again the formula by pasting special values, and now I can copy it. Here I know the first one is Switzerland, the last one should be Indonesia. So now what I do is I have again a column, and I right click into the Switzerland file, but again, you know, we have to transpose it, so we make sure that we take in this case a column and turn it into a row, and now we have eliminated everything else. So no additional information that used to be there. So now our data set already looks a little bit more well, it looks a little bit healthier. We don't really need the first column A, so we can actually delete that. Okay, so at this point comes the second challenge, which is that what we need is not the data in a table format, but in a list. And all we know is that the first column here goes from 1900 to 2021, and that goes to and that applies to Switzerland. Okay, so if we go to country names, by the way, I can delete that sheet again, don't really need it. So just delete that sheet here. Okay, let me just copy the entire data set again into a different sheet. And okay, so what we ultimately need is the following. So we have here Switzerland, which is our first observation, and we have always 122 rows. Okay, so what we need is, in order to make it usable, or in order to allow us to easily VLOOKUP the values here, we need to create now a list where we have Switzerland, and we have that 122 times. Okay. Okay, so I copy down. So now we have Switzerland 122 times. Well, then what I need is, I need next Eastern Europe, again 122 times. So I need that underneath. Okay, so now I have Eastern Europe. Okay, so now I have to copy that again 122 times. Okay, then I would have to do Uruguay 122 times. And as you can tell, this is obviously not very efficient, because they're like many other countries, and there is no way we should do that manually. So there is another slightly advanced Excel option, which is to take advantage of a macro. And in order to see that, let's first copy the first row again into our sheet 4. So those are the country names. And I need each country 122 times stacked on top of each other. So in the first step, I just can highlight the first row, and I copy down all my countries 122 times. Control D. Okay, let's fit to content a little bit. Okay, so now we have here, actually I copied it 123 times. I have to delete the last row again. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to stack our data set on top of each other. So what I can do is I know the first 120 observations in our data set, they belong to Switzerland. But then what I would like to do is, in order to create a list, I would take the entire columns to the right of Switzerland and put it underneath Switzerland. So now I take everything which is to the right of Eastern Europe, I copy that, cut it, and put it underneath Eastern Europe. And then I take everything next to Uruguay, I copy everything to the right, I cut it, and put it underneath Uruguay. And then I can do that until I reached the last one and stacked it. But that is something that can be done with a macro much more conveniently. And for this purpose, I will quickly open a different Excel sheet that will illustrate how it works. Okay, so now I have opened a new Excel sheet which already I called Sortie. And I have this Excel file for at least probably 20 years by now. I got that Excel file once from a colleague when I was still at the American University of Beirut, and she worked at the IMF, and we once talked about some data issues, and she said, "Oh, I have your solution. And I can give you an Excel sheet that exactly takes care of what you want." And so she gave me that Excel file, and I cannot tell how big of a service this file called sortie.xls has provided me since then. So what I do is now, as I just mentioned, what we want to do is we want to take our country names and basically sort them in a way that I just illustrated earlier manually, but I want to automate that process. So I want to stack all the countries 122 times on top of each other. Okay. So again, those are our country names. And I can now zoom in. So now we have the first column is 122 times Switzerland, and then we have Eastern Europe 122 times, then we have Uruguay 122 times, and so on. And now I want to make one list that will essentially become a stacked time series. How many countries do we have in total? So if we highlight the first columns, we can see that we have 248 columns. Okay, so what you see here, this sortie.xls file has an embedded macro. And so we can run that macro by pressing Alt F8. Actually, we can open the macro. So now you see, oh, there is something called sortie. What that program will do is it will actually sort the data, but we have to edit it, but it doesn't take a lot. So we click on Edit, and we can make that maybe a little bit smaller here. So when you open it and you press Alt F8, so you see that there are things that you can change. So the first one is for I equals 1 to 248. What that tells us is I want to stack 248 columns. So what that means is we have here from A to column IN, those are 248 columns. And those are the ones that we want to stack. Okay. So F8, okay. So we want to stack 248 columns. And then it says here, range B1 to B122. Well, those are the number of rows that we have. And basically what this program does, it takes the number of rows, B, which is the next one, the next column to A, it grabs it and then it copies it under the previous one. And we also have to put the 122 rows here. So in other words, when you see this data set, or when you see this formula, there are and you want to use it, you need to know how many columns do I have. In this case, we have 248. And the number of columns needs to go into this highlighted area. And then you need to twice tell this macro program how many rows you have that you want to stack. In our case, these are now 122, so you have to plug in here 102. And if you had, for example, only 50 rows, then you would punch in here a 50, but we have 122. And then the same number, the 122, needs to be again entered next to X offset. Okay. So you just look at this macro, you barely mess around with it. You have to change 3 numbers depending on the data set that you want to stack. The first one is how many columns do you have, that goes in here. Then how many rows do you have, and that goes once next to the range and once next to the X offset. And of course the assumption is that you fill your data beginning from A1. So you need to start pasting your data set into cell A1. Okay, so now we can run this program. Again, we press Alt F8. And then we have already specified it so that all looks correct. So we can close that again. And now we just run it. And now see what happens. Takes a while. Okay, so something is happening. And I guess you get an idea of what's happening. What I did earlier manually is the program doing automatically. Okay, so now you see what happened. So now we used a program to automatically stack all the countries. So now we have 122 times Switzerland, and then we have 122 times Eastern Europe, and so on. And the last one were the 122 Indonesias. Okay. So the next thing that we need is we need another column, or we need another stack time series, because we know is that our first observation is here 1900, and then it goes down until 2020 or 2021. So if we just double check this one, we can go to this little icon here, fill series. So now we know that yes. So the first stacked time series goes from 1900 to 2021. Okay, well, there are like two ways we can get those numbers next to each other. What you can do is you copy again the years, put it in a different sheet like sheet 2 in my sortie, and now you just copy this one 248 times to the right. Okay, so now copy right, by the way, is Control R. Okay, so now we have actually I copied it 249 times. So, but now we have 248 columns with a country list, or not with a country list, with a time series list, or time observations that go from 1900 to 2021. Okay, so now I just press again Alt F8 and let Excel stack that for me. It takes a while. Okay, so now we have our data set, or we have the country list, the years, and we just insert. I can just copy and paste it over here. And now you see that we have next to Indonesia always the correct year. And so now we are already a step further. So now we have already the basic frame for our stacked time series. But now I need to go back and do the final step, which is we have to go to our WID data set. And what I know is if I just copy and paste now the numbers, I know that the first column are all the observations for Switzerland. Then comes Eastern Europe, and I'll just copy the numbers itself because I already know how they are sorted, and I go one more time back to my sortie file and just delete this one here, and that didn't work. Okay, so we copy the numbers from our WID data set that we want to stack. We go to our sortie file. Okay, so now I know that the first column A, the 122 observations, they belong to Switzerland, and the last one belonged to Indonesia, and I think the second one was Eastern Europe. So we need to keep track a little bit, of course, of the nature of our data set, make sure we don't make a mistake. But so far all looks good, and we press again Alt F8, we run the sortie program, and we let Excel stack the values. Okay, so I'm probably done soon. Okay, and so now you see that we have stacked the values, so I can copy those and put them next to the years. And so now we have turned a time series, a data set in table form into a list form or as a stacked time series. So what I do is now I just insert on top a new row, and now I call this country, year, and the variable that we downloaded we call just Gini. Okay, so now I'm done with the salty program. I just copy my stack time series, and I can insert it again in a new sheet. In my case now sheet 4, just an empty sheet, and I paste it here. So now at least we have a stacked time series. Okay, so we don't need sheet 3 anymore. So it's always good to clean up your data set once in a while and get rid of sheets that you don't really need anymore. So we don't need sheet 3. And we can call now sheet 4 stacked time series. Okay. So at this point, what we now still need is we still need to insert here the World Bank code, and we need to insert the ID for like AFG 1900 for Afghanistan or CHE 1900 for Switzerland. Okay, so at this point we spent a lot of time on really converting a table into a stacked time series, but we haven't really identified the correct country code. So that is the last thing that we need to do. So what I do is I just copy the entire country list and I paste it again into a new sheet, and then I remove the duplicates by going to data, and then there's this little remove duplicates icon. My data has headers, the headers country, and so now we delete that. So we have 242 unique values, but many of them we probably don't need, like Adomena. So anyhow, this is the World Inequality Database country, and we want to look up what the World Bank code is. And for this purpose, I can go back again to our main data set that will ultimately include all the variables, because there we have already used the World Bank codes. So I quickly split the screen again so we can see both data files. Okay, so now I show on the right hand side the data set that will be our final result. We have already here dailies, and what we want is we want to get here our Gini variable. And what you can see is we have already here the country name and the country code. So what we want to do is we want to see how often the World Inequality database uses the same country code, and if they don't use the same country code, then we have to manually add it again. But let's hope for the best. And so we do VLOOKUP equals VLOOKUP. So we look up Switzerland, and even though we have the same variables here several times, we just can use that as the table array in which we look up our values, so that won't be a problem. But if you wanted to, you could have a separate file where you have it just for each country name once, and you have the World Bank code. But it's not a problem if you look up such values in a panel, as long as all the values are the same for the various countries. And so here you see what's important is that whenever we look something up from another data set, Excel will already add those $ in order to keep the table array fixed. So then we say 2, because we want the second column from our, so we highlight the data set, we highlight everything from column A to B, and then we want to look up in the first column the country name, and if we find the country name, we want the code, which is in the second column. And if we don't find it, well, then it's simply not there, and this is taken care of by the term false. And again, this is a very important information for Excel, because otherwise you get weird results. Okay, so Switzerland is CHE, so now we can copy down that formula. And we see, yeah, we have quite a bunch of non-matches. So what we do is we just sort our data, and I can quickly zoom in. So we sort according to World Bank code. And then we have at the bottom, we have all those countries, which are quite a lot. Oh God, okay. So we have to clean them up manually. Okay, so Eastern Europe, that's not a country in, that's a region. We are only interested in regions. And as always, what I do is I just highlight again those NAs, because now I need to rely on what I know, or what I think I know, but I make a mistake. But I think Slovakia is SVK. Oceania is a region, Asia is a region, other sub-Saharan Africa, other Western Europe, those are all region. Korea is KOR, Bahamas, BHS, Côte d'Ivoire, CIV. European Union is not a country, or not a one that the World Bank lists. Middle Africa, Latin America, Palestine is PSE. Okay, Western Europe is a region, urban China, we don't have that. Other Latin America, Egypt, EGY. East Africa, Europe, those are all regions. Other East Asia, rural Africa, Central Asia, Asia, West Asia, Africa, those are all region. German Democratic Republic, that country doesn't exist anymore, so we don't have to worry about that either. Eastern Europe region, other Russia, Yemen is YEM, Gambia, GMB, USA, West Africa is a region, European Union, Middle East, MENA world, East Asia, Hong Kong, HKG, West Asia is a region, Taiwan, TWN, but it's not available at the World Bank. Russia and Central Asia, that's a region. Vietnam. Okay, Swaziland, West Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, Iran. So, yeah, sometimes you need to do something which is a little bit tedious, but most of them are regions. So North Korea is People Republic of Korea. MENA is a region, Latin America, South Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, other Sub-Saharan world. Those are all regions. Zanzibar is another World Bank country, other Western Europe, other Latin. Kyrgyzstan is KGZ. Venezuela is VVen. Congo, the COG. Macau, MAC. Democratic Republic of Congo is COD. South Africa at market exchange rates. I don't know if they mean the country South Africa or the southern part of Africa. So let's see if we have South Africa already as a country. We have South Sudan. Yeah, we have already South Africa. So that must be a region. Okay. So now I just want to double check that I didn't make a mistake. And I just sort quickly all the countries that I added. And I just want to double check them again. So now I sort, and I say I want to sort by the column 155. So I pretend that this is my header row, and I want to copy this one. I want to sort this one. So, okay, Bahamas, I'm very sure that's correct. Cote d'Ivoire, that's correct. Democratic, that's correct. Congo, Egypt, Gambia, Hong Kong, Iran, Kyrgyzstan, Korea, Macau, People's Republic. So that all looks correct. Swaziland. Let me check Swaziland. So I quickly go to the WDI and quickly see what SWZ is. Yeah, Eswatini, that is the new name for Swaziland. Taiwan, USA, Venezuela, Vietnam, Yemen. Okay, so it looks like I didn't do a mistake. So what I can do now is I can just take out the formula, because once we have done with the formula, we try to get rid of it. So I'll just copy everything over itself, paste special values, and now I can also get rid of that formatting, no fill. And if you want to, you can sort your entire data set by WID country, but that's not necessary. But now we have a reference case where we have only the World Bank code of all the countries for which we actually have countries in our final data set. And what we do next is we look up those World Bank codes for the WID country. So we go back to our stacked time series, and now we just can VLOOK up Switzerland. Okay, so where do we want to look it up? In this, in my case now, sheet 5, where I have the list with all the WID country in the World Bank code. So I highlight this entire data set, or that entire array. But as you probably can already tell, it's very important at this point to put those little dollar signs in between, so that the table array is not copied down. And then, as always, we want the second column, and if you don't find it, it's false. Okay, so Switzerland is CHE, and now we just can copy that down. And you see we have now all the World Bank codes. In the next step, let's delete again the formula. And the final thing that we need to do is we create our ID. The ID is always the World Bank code and the year. So we copy that down. Okay, it looks good. So we take out the formula, copy, paste special over itself, paste values. Okay, so now we cleaned up the WID data set. The final thing that we need to do is we need to import the data into our final data set. So I'll split the screen again quickly. Okay, so now I split the screen. So on the right hand side you see the WID data set that we cleaned up with all the IDs and the values, and here to the left you see our WDI data set where we want to have all our final observations. And you see I have already created a column for Gini. So now we have to read in those income inequality indicators, and again we do VLOOKUP, so equals VLOOKUP, and now we want to look up the ID where we want to import something, and now we have to look up column column D where we have the ID, and column E, so we have the ID and the Gini coefficient in our other data set, and you see Excel is again putting those little dollar signs there, which helps us to keep the table array fixed. Now we want the actual value, which is again the second column, and if we don't find it, it is false. Okay, so we have no observation for Afghanistan 1960. But I should be able to copy down that formula now. And you see the first observation that we have is Afghanistan 1980. So let's see if that is correct. Let's go to AFG 1980. And that looks indeed like the correct value, 0.57. So we can, pretty much trust Excel in its abilities to correctly VLOOKUP values. And the last thing we always do is we just get rid again of those formula by pasting the values. And now we have another series from the World Inequality Database, and that was probably one of the more difficult data sets to work with, because we needed to first extract a line in a cell with multiple lines, and then we needed to convert a table into a stacked time series with the help of that sortie file. But anyhow, it is, once you practice it a few more times, it becomes almost second nature. And it's very important that you review and practice a lot by yourself and do your own mistakes in order to become more proficient. But yeah, anyhow, I hope that was useful. Thanks a lot.